This is the Blossom Trees extended step-by-step watercolour tutorial. So let's get started. A list of all these materials will be in the description below. First of all, I'm just mixing up some of the Quinacridone Magenta on its own. I'm just making a large puddle of this. I'm using my pipette. You don't have to use a pipette, so it just makes it easier just to make a great big puddle of watercolour. So I'm giving that a nice stir, and I'm using the size 6 brush to mix these colours. Now I'm starting off now with a phthalo blue, adding a little bit of water. Make sure you have plenty of paint so you don't have to worry about it later. Now I'm adding some of the Hansa yellow light and the phthalo blue to make a nice light green. I've actually made sort of 2 batches, one slightly sort of lighter than the other, so a mid green and a light green, and again using the pipette to make more paint. Sorry, this colour mixing here is just a little bit low down, but basically I am starting with some indigo, a little pinch of indigo, and then I'm going to add a little bit of pink and a touch of yellow, and it really just neutralises that colour. So there's the pink. Just give that a little stir. Rinse your brush, especially if you're going into yellow. I know sometimes I don't do this, but these are the rules. I'm obeying them right now. And I've used the pipette to make a nice big colour. So I've actually moved up the palette there so you can see better there. So now I'm wetting the paper all over. If you want, you can use a larger brush. I'm just sticking to these 3, and perhaps the 10 was a bit small for this, but I'm going with it. So just giving it a nice soak. Just make sure you don't have any puddles when you do this before you apply the paint. And now I'm just using the size 10 just to drizzle in that lovely Quinacridone Magenta. But as I say, you can use permanent rose, opera rose even, or even if you don't have any of those, alizarin crimson. Any pink will do. So I'm just putting a little bit here and there because I want to leave a few gaps because I'm going to be putting some green in as well, and you don't want to mix the green and the pink completely together because you could get more of a browny sort of tone. So I'm putting some of this colour now below the tree. Now I know it's not in the photograph, in the reference photograph, but I want it to look like the blossoms have fallen for the tree, so I'm putting it along the edge of the path as well. Now isn't that pretty already? It's such a pretty colour, this Quinacridone Magenta. So I'm just putting it at the base of these trees and in the distance. It's almost like how you paint clouds or how you paint the sky, wet in wet. So I'm putting some of this lighter green now on the sort of horizon area and just below, and then dropping it in the pink. Now obviously I don't want this to go brown, so what I must do is to make sure that I've got clean colour each time. So you just sort of drop it into your paint and then load your brush again, so you don't sort of mix it too much. So I'm just adding a little bit more of a yellowy sort of tone there as well, just in the distance, and have more texture and marks in the middle and foreground, and doing the same on the right hand side. The trick with watercolour is to try to keep your brush clean and fresh with colour. So don't overuse it on the paper. Don't keep sort of stirring. Always keep getting fresh paint so that you don't mix those colours too much on the paper. That's when things do get a little bit muddy. I'm making fresh, clean colour again now. Putting a slightly darker green just in the foreground. So I've actually added a little bit more phthalo blue with the yellow, just so it pops that green and creates a bit of depth, because obviously you've got your stronger tones in the foreground, lighter colours in the distance there. And also make the paint slightly creamier, and it'll make it look a bit darker as well. So I'm just painting the path now, this very neutral, very watered down colour. Remember the path is wet or damp with the pink colour as well. So I've painted that wet in wet, and I'm using the phthalo blue now to paint through the gaps in the sky. And I'm using a little bit, I just decided, just literally on the spur of the moment, to put a little bit of that blue on the path, and then adding that neutral colour as well. Wet in wet. Now I'm getting my sponge. It's a natural sponge. I'm putting it into some clean water and then wringing out all the water so the sponge is damp and not wet. Otherwise you just dilute your paints again. So I'm mixing up some of the Quinacridone Magenta, slightly creamier than what I had for the trees and around the path and the grass area, and painting this now damp into wet, or it could be damp into damp depending on what your paper is doing. If your paper has dried, give it a little spritz with a spritzer bottle just to dampen everything again. But if you don't want to do that, you could let everything dry and then carefully wet the surface of your paper again with a large soft brush, and then paint wet into wet. I'm actually putting a little bit of this sponging on the path as well as on the grass area as well, and already it really looks pretty. It's sort of building up. So what I'm doing now, even thicker, creamier Quinacridone Magenta. I'm actually sponging damp into damp now. When you're doing the sponging, if you see, I'm just lifting up. I'm doing it very gently. Don't press too hard because you won't get the pattern of the sponge. Speaking about sponges, if you can't get hold of a natural sponge, because sometimes you just can't, sometimes I've used a synthetic one and I've actually torn them at an angle so you get some nice textures. You have to give it a good soak and you have to work those sponges a little bit more. And I find the more you use synthetic ones, the better they become over time. So maybe give that a little try if you can't get hold of a natural sponge. So I'm just very delicately here, just finishing off. I'm giving my sponge a little rinse now of this pink colour, taking all the excess off, making sure I get rid of all that pink because I'm going to sponge in some green and I don't want any pink on there. So I'm making a new batch of mid green and it's creamier. You always want a sponge creamy colour, not too watery, and it just makes better marks. And I'm just sponging in between those gaps now with this very light limey green colour. Very delicate sponging. So what you get with damp into damp sponging is you still get texture, not as much as wet on dry sponging, but you'll get some mark making, and especially when it's damp you get something there. Now this is a thicker colour and I've actually added a little bit of pink in there to make a slightly warmer green. So it's the phthalo blue, the yellow with the pink, and you get more of a natural warm looking green. And it's quite nice. So it's still damp into damp and it's slightly stronger in tone. I'm just building up light to dark and a little bit of texture. Now I'm using obviously one of my favourite techniques, little sprinkle of salt. Make sure you really spread this out. Don't put salt in clumps. Nice and spread out. You get better results. And make sure you put it on damp paper, not too wet. And obviously if it's too dry, it may not work. So my salt has dried, and if I was to be critical of my own work, could I really be? I would say that my painting was a little bit too wet in the centre, and that's why the salt's pushed it out a little bit more. And if you look at the path and things like that, I would say I could have waited another minute and it would have worked better. That's the only thing. But it still left me some nice textures and I can work with that. So what I'm doing now is I'm painting these background trees. I'm using the size 6 brush. It's wet on dry, and I'm using the phthalo blue with the yellow, and I've actually mixed a little bit more blue in there, and I'm dropping this colour now wet into wet just at the base so it drifts up into the tree, so you get it's darker at the bottom, which if you kind of look at the reference photograph it is as well. You don't want to give too much emphasis to this. This is why I'm keeping it nice and soft, because I don't want it to come forward, but at the same time it is there. It's our horizon and we want to sort of, it gives us distance as well. I do love this phthalo turquoise. It's so lovely. It's very transparent. It's a beautiful blue. If you don't have this blue, you could use Prussian or just turquoise, or even Winsor blue, any of those sort of cold blue colours. I'm using the size 2 brush now, and I've mixed just a little bit more phthalo turquoise in with that yellow, and I'm painting very carefully that horizon, but I've also painted around a little figure that I've included as well, which is a little bit of a bonus for the members, because I'm going to put a person or little people in my painting. So I'm just working this colour now right to the right hand side, damp into damp with this size 2 brush. I don't want this to come forward too much. I just want it to be in the background. So what I'm doing now, remember this is dry, and I'm using the sponge now wet on dry, and it's quite sort of milky, this wash. It's not too creamy, but this is the distant blossom, so we want it small and we don't want it too dark. So I'm just delicately putting this on in this distant, in this sort of background, and just giving it a little bit of texture, very softly putting this on with my sponge. You can see I always stop. I'm having a little think all the time, so don't just race on. So what I'm doing now is I've just got a slightly stronger tone and I'm making slightly bigger marks. Now I'm actually using a part of the sponge where the sponge is a little bit more textured. So but if it's not, just sort of maybe just hold your sponge slightly longer on the paper so the mark gets slightly bigger. but just, you know, just think about making bigger marks, if that makes any sense. But I'm just very delicately putting this stronger tone on there. And what I'm doing now is I've mixed up a bit of the phthalo blue with the pink. So basically make a dark, creamy pink. The phthalo blue is perfect for this. And again, I'm sort of sponging straight on top. Remember, this blossom here is right above the photographer's head, the person who took the photograph. So this is going to be the darkest sort of blossom. And again, though, put it very gently on. Don't press too hard because you'll lose that texture. It will sort of be a bit more of a splodge. I'm just putting that isn't it a lovely colour though? It's so nice. So we're painting shadow colours there in the sort of foreground blossom. If you look at the reference photograph, there's quite a lot of tonal value. So really kind of look at that and you decide how you want to sort of show it. What I'm doing now is I'm just putting a little bit of texture in the grasses using the size 6 brush, just with the mid green. That's the yellow with a touch of the blue. Remember that blue, any cold blue is quite strong, so you always less is more with that colour. So I'm just using, now I've swapped to the size 2 just to put some smaller grasses in. If you look at the edge of the path in the photograph, it's got quite a bit of detail there. Now the path is a useful tool to create depth in our painting, so you want the bigger marks in the foreground, and as you go into the sort of middle distance and then the distance, you want small, much paler marks. Almost don't put any marks in the distance. Let the viewer's mind sort of make up for what you haven't painted. It's amazing what the imagination will do. So that's why I put darker marks in the foreground. So you're making this 2D surface look 3D, and it's a good tool to have in your artistic bag. So I'm just sort of really concentrating on this because it is quite important. This is 1 point perspective as well. So you've got the trees and the path looking like they're sort of verging to a point on the horizon. So it's great stuff here. Good artistic tools here. So I'm mixing up the tree trunks and branches, and I'm using indigo and pink. You could just use the indigo on its own if you wanted to. A useful tip here is to draw an arrow going to the right. That tells you the light. I'm going to draw a little sun here. You can see my drawing skills here. Just a little sun, just to show you the light's coming from the left. Okay, so I'm putting on my tree trunk, and this colour's quite creamy, not too creamy that it doesn't move. You want the paint to be able to move, so don't put it on too dark. It'll be too opaque and it'll look flat. Now I'm just going to take off the light from the left hand side. In the photograph, there really isn't very much lights and darks like this, but these are tools that we can use in a painting. As long as our light source is the same everywhere, you get away with it. So that's why I've actually reminded myself up there with the little arrow. I'm using this size 6 brush to paint the tree trunk and branches. I will swap to the 2 and I will use my twig. Now you can just spend as long as you like painting these branches. You can go off and have a cup of tea and your dinner. You can do whatever you like. That's the beauty of painting branches and tree trunks. You know, there isn't this timing issue like there is when you're painting a sky and things like that. So just take your time, remember to breathe. I've swapped the size 2 brush here as well, and I'm just painting these branches delicately. Now I find it easier to paint them upside down, but remember to turn your reference photograph upside down because it'll be a bit confusing. But I'm just taking my time and painting these in, wet on dry. Enjoy. If you notice, I leave little gaps here and there between the blossom with sort of raggedy edges either end, so it kind of looks like the branches are going in and out of the blossom. So that's quite a useful little tip there. If you notice, the other thing I'm doing is I'm just with the tip of the brush spreading out the sort of like it's going down to the roots in the ground rather than sort of ending with a straight line. Just really have that coming out naturally. With these tree trunks in the distance, I'm gone to my size 2 brush and I've made the tonal value a little bit lighter as well. I'm just painting in this sort of middle distance tree trunk, and it's actually around someone that's out walking their dogs. They're taking a seat on the bench there. If you look at the reference photograph, I have actually removed the person on the left hand side of the bench just because I thought it was going to get too complicated, but you can include them if you like as well. I quite like putting people in paintings. It really brings life to them. I'm just putting some very small marks in the distance, little sort of tree trunks and things like that, and using this little dark colour now, the indigo and the magenta, just along the edge of this path, just to give a little bit of form to the path, especially sort of in the middle distance and in the foreground. I'm painting the dogs now. There are 2 dogs here, so I'm painting them in. Now, if you don't want to put the dogs and the person in, you don't have to. I mean, it's quite nice to have a little go. Make sure if you do, make your wash quite dilute. So if you don't like it, just wet that area and just lift it off with some kitchen towel and it should come off nicely. But you know, if you've got the drawing in there already, you'll know if you want to, you know, paint it or not. You just have to sort of paint a flat wash. You don't have to put any detail. You're just basically filling in a sort of an outline shape, a bit like painting by numbers, literally. So don't worry. I've also put some shadow underneath them. Just using the same colour, just slightly creamier, and I'm dropping a few little darks here and there on the dogs, on the person, around the back of them, and on the side of the bench as well. I'm using my twig now, so I've made a puddle. You really do need to make a puddle to use the twig effectively, and it comes off nicely. Now, I've just sharpened this recently with a pencil sharpener. I'm dipping it in to the paint. Now, you don't have to do this. You can use a rigger or a liner brush, but I really like using a twig, as you know if you've watched a lot of my tutorials, because I just feel like I'm drawing with a pencil that's got water or paint coming out of it, and there's such a freedom to it. But if you find your twigs a bit blobby, just practice on a piece of paper. It's just sometimes you just have to kind of get your own rhythm with it as well. Or if you find it's blobby, just give it a little tap on the side of your palette and that little drip comes off, and then you can start painting. So I'm mixing up a little bit more colour for some more sponging, and this is going to be wet on dry, and I've added the pink with a touch of indigo this time, just to create some more dark tonal sort of blossom just towards the top of the painting. Remember, this is overhead and this is where the strongest, darkest tones are. I've added even a little bit more indigo there just to really make those tones pop. Now, if it's already dark, if your painting is already dark in this area, you may not want to do this. So it all depends how much you did beforehand. So you've got to make those decisions. So if you see me do something, you think yours is dark enough, then just leave it. Now this isn't in the reference photograph, but I think this will really bring the painting to life. I've just got the diluted version of what I've just used on those blossoms. That's the pink with a touch of indigo, very diluted, and I'm painting some shadows, broken colour, wet on dry, across that path coming from those trees. And look at that, it brings it to life. And it's quite nice, that middle distance one, because I brought it straight across the dogs and under the bench and the tree the other side as well. What I'm going to do now is I'm painting an imaginary shadow of a tree here in the foreground. And I'm sure there probably is a tree just to the left here as well. It's like a little row of trees, isn't there? I've gone to my bigger brush to do this, to make some larger marks. I had to swap over just to make some large marks of shadows going across this path. Don't be afraid of it, just go for it. It's quite a watered down shadow. I've just slightly put a slightly stronger dark wet into wet onto this shadow just to give it a little bit more depth and tone. And I'm doing the same thing now under the dogs and under the person at the bench. And I thought I'd use this kind of almost like a glaze. It's a very thin wash. And I'm just going across the background here on the horizon, and you see how that really pushes those trees back just by putting that other layer on there. I almost felt it was too warm and it was coming forward, but that very thin cool glaze really pushes those trees back, creating distance. Now I'm going to be using my white gouache. Now you don't have to do this, you could just leave it how it is right now, but I just like to show you all these other sort of techniques and tips that you can use. So I've added some pink to my white. It's quite creamy, and I've added a little bit more white there just to make it quite a pale colour. I'm using my clean damp sponge, and I'm just going to sponge on just above those trees. And by the way, I've dried everything. Everything's dry, always dry in between your layers. Now I found that sponge didn't do what I wanted it to do, so I've swapped this other sponge here, and I'm just sponging this colour now, wet on dry, onto the blossom, really just to create a little bit more light blossom, you know. I mean, and also it's such a pretty colour, and that's the real reason I'm doing it, just because I can really. But as I say, you don't have to do this. What I'm doing now is I'm actually just sponging that pink, just without the white, just some of the pink onto below the trees and a little bit on the path. It's just quite nice to do this. I know it's not in the photograph, but it just looks like some of the blossom has fallen onto the grass and onto the path. What I'm doing now is obviously one of my favourite little techniques. I'm spattering this very pale pink here and there just to give the painting a sparkle and just finishing off, you know, just bringing it to life, tying up loose ends as it were. Someone sometimes has to take this from my hand though, because I do get a little bit carried away. I've just actually put a little bit more of a mid-tone pink there, just spattering away, and I thought, oh, might maybe get some more darker paint. Like I said, someone should take this brush off me. But I do like spattering, but again, you don't have to do this. You could stop, as I said earlier, before you even started with the white paint. But I'm just spattering here and there to create texture and to finish off. Now this is the time to assess, to see if you need to do anything more to your painting. I've taken off the tape to have a good look at my painting. So I'm just painting with the white paint. It's like a little arch window for the sort of coat area, and just using a little bit of the indigo for the head and the legs. That's all I'm doing. I'm not sort of painting too much detail there, and just a little bit of shadow with the indigo with my size 2 brush. Remember, the light's coming from the left. So I think I'll leave it there for now. I hope you've liked the little extras, you know, painting that person in, getting a little bit more darks on the tree trunks and a bit more shading in the blossom as well. If you have any questions about this tutorial, please put them in the comment section. And if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel where you'll get updates of my latest tutorials. And if you'd like to get access to my exclusive weekly tutorials with bonus content and access to my downloadable outline sketches, why not think about supporting me on my Patreon membership? Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.